Water is our lifeblood. Without water, any talk about economic development or growth or any of the other kinds of conversations we have, tourism, you name your item that winds up on our agenda. None of that matters if we can't promise people a clean water supply.
I feel like the community has been wronged. They've just been wronged. They have been dumping their toxic chemicals on this community for decades, for too long. Much like TCE contamination occurred, PFAS went unseen and unregulated.
PFAS are a group of man-made chemicals that have been, a long history of use in our society. The early use started in 1930s.
They are good at repelling water and grease. And so they have been used in the manufacturing process for many years, many decades.
They have special molecular structures that make them really good for many things.
Humans have exposure to PFAS in many different ways. Water is one of them, but by far it is not the biggest exposure. The biggest exposure is by actually what we ingest, not what we drink.
There was a cattle farmer in New Mexico who had to throw away thousands and thousands of gallons of milk that his cattle had produced because they were feeding on fodder that was growing on his farm that he had been watering with PFAS contaminated water.
PFAS is in so many products that we use every day, from Gore-Tex to our pizza boxes.
I'm quite sure that in this room we have PFAS present, either in some of our materials that we bring in, and or there have also been recent discoveries of PFAS in painting.
We use it in so much in cosmetics and everything that all of that use ends up in the wastewater when we flush our toilet or wash our hands.
I know that PFAS are used in again, many textiles, upholstery, carpets, a lot of commercial and industrial products, including aqueous film forming foams, also known as, for short, AFFF.
Firefighting foams at military sites.
We thought that we might see it downstream, knowing that it's a major component of firefighting foam, that you might see it downstream of an airport, of an Air Force base, of an Air National Guard base, those types of things.
Because of the molecular structure, the PFAS can help the foam to form a thin liquid to quickly cover the fires so that they're very effective extinguishing the fires. And because of the several decades of fire training, a lot of PFAS has been released to the land surface, and they then infiltrate through the soil by infiltration events like rainfall, and then they come to the groundwater.
We have a central well field that is downstream in the aquifer, downstream from Davis-Monthan. The Davis-Monthan contaminants are over 1,000 parts per trillion. The EPA health advisory is less than 2 parts per trillion. I mean, that's less than a drop of water in an Olympic-sized pool. And that's the level that the EPA has set us. You better watch out.
The EPA sets water quality standards for Tucson water. And what I will say is that it's tough to establish what they call MCLs, maximum contaminant levels. So one of the ways around it is that the EPA will issue these health advisories. So what Tucson Water has done is we've taken these health advisories as if they were MCLs. The difference between a health advisory and MCL is the MCL is enforceable where the health advisory is not enforceable. And so, but we here at Tucson Water take that health advisory as if it were, and so we hold ourselves accountable to that standard.
Once an MCL is put into place, Superfund dollars kick in, and all the different environmental protection agency kinds of protocols kick in. If it's just a health advisory, though, it's sort of be on your guard sort of the thing. And so we don't have right now adequate federal protections for PFAS.
PFAS has not been regulated federally.
Right now, there are no regulations on PFAS.
One of the strong issues that we're pursuing right now is number one, get an MCL set for PFAS. Make sure that that Superfund dollars are coming to the jurisdictions that have the contamination issues. And frankly, every jurisdiction in the country, in the world, that has a military base in the city has probably got a PFAS contamination problem, because it is the military who's largely been the people who are putting this stuff into both the soils and into the sewer systems.
The Air Force, the same polluters that contaminated the water on the TCE issues in the 70s, pretty much are the same potential responsible parties who were disposing these chemicals in Tucson.
I am right now not overly concerned that customers of Tucson Water are drinking PFAS tainted water. The reason for that is because the vast majority of what we're serving people is CAP water, is Colorado River water. In addition to that, we constantly monitor our wells all over Tucson, and if we find any detection at all of PFAS, we take that well out of circulation. Right now, having the plume immediately upstream, and we're not talking, you know, 10 and 20 miles upstream. We're talking hundreds of yards upstream from our central well field. The Department of Defense has got to step up to the plate and put in treatment plants surrounding that plume to both arrest the plume and to also replace some of the wells that we've had to take out of operation.
We've shut down over 35 wells in order to make sure that we weren't serving any PFAS to our customers.
Taking wells out of service is obviously not a strategy towards addressing PFAS. We've got to get the treatment plants in place. We've got to get federal dollars. It's got to come through the Department of Defense. And we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, we're talking tens of millions of dollars just for the city of Tucson. Our water department has already invested well over $50 million of our own dollars in testing, in treatment, in trying to contain the plume. But we're talking probably 5 times that just to arrest the immediate problem, and then hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, annually to maintain the treatment plants once they're in place.
I know that PFAS have been found in multiple locations at the Air Force Plant 44, at the Davis Mountain Air Force Base, and at the Arizona Air National Guard Base. Those chemicals have made their way into our groundwater and have caused a massive contamination in our community, in our entire town.
Originally constructed in the 90s to treat the South Tucson groundwater for TCE and 1,4-dioxane, the Tucson Airport Remediation Project, or TARP, now uses its advanced oxidation process to treat for PFAS as well. So how exactly does this advanced oxidation treatment process work? First, water is pumped into the facility from wells surrounding the contaminated groundwater plume. The water is then filtered through the desanders, which remove any larger rocks or gravel from the water stream. Then, the water moves through another series of filters to remove any smaller particles. After the groundwater has been desanded, it reaches the influent booster pumps, which provide the pressure needed to boost the water through the rest of the treatment process. At this point, hydrogen peroxide is added to the water, beginning the oxidation process. The mixed water then works its way through UV treatment trains, which use powerful UV lamps to further oxidize the water, destroying both TCE and 1,4-dioxane. After the UV treatment, the water is filtered through large tanks, each holding 18,000 pounds of granular activated carbon, or GAC. Samples are taken from various points on the tanks to track the PFAS concentration levels. Once PFAS concentration in the GAC reaches a certain point, the GAC is removed from the tanks, properly incinerated, and replaced with new GAC. Finally, the groundwater leaves the TARP facility and is recharged into the aquifer, treated for TCE, 1,4-dioxane, and, thanks to the GAC filters, PFAS. In addition to the TARP facility, Tucson Water has other remediation projects in the works.
The Central Tucson PFAS project, ADQ was able to utilize one of the wells that got taken out of service of those 35 wells that I mentioned, one of them downstream of Davis Mountain. We actually have given that over to ADQ, and they are using that well to pump water out of the aquifer and run it through. They are using resin ion exchange to treat that water to kind of clean up some of the PFAS there. So that's a project operated by ADQ. In that same general area, we're actually moving forward with the Randolph Park project in order to drill potentially 1 to 2 wells along with treatment to basically develop capture of that part of the PFAS plume. So, and Tucson Water at this point is moving ahead on our own with that, with the hope that at some point we could get reimbursement for those costs, but we are moving out ahead of that on our own.
One treatment facility is not going to get it done. We're going to need multiple treatment facilities.
We've been extremely proactive. We even invested over $400,000 in an instrument to analyze PFAS in-house, and that's a big deal because right now, if you were to take a sample, what I just heard today, it could take up to 2 months to get that result back if you use a private laboratory. When we analyze that in-house, it takes about 2 to 3 days. So our ability to take the sample, turn it around, and make an operational decision is quick, and that really allows us to be more nimble in our response to PFAS wherever it is.
Federal government needs to regulate the chemicals. Companies need to start cleaning it up and taking every step to prevent the spread of PFAS. However, it seems that may not happen because PFAS have already spread. There's no way they can prevent that anymore. But what they can do is they can start to remediate it and stop it from continuing to spread.
The immediate need is for the Department of Defense to step up to the plate, get their checkbook out, and start writing checks to local jurisdictions, such as Tucson, to put in treatment plants so that we can clean our central well field. Make sure that when we are serving our groundwater, that is not PFAS tainted.
They are a problem for Tucson Water and for people in general because the EPA did some testing and determined that they were harmful to human health.
They are essentially perfect materials for, many things due to their special molecular structures. However, we found that, in the past 20 years or so, that they are actually toxic. They have contaminated basically everywhere in the environment, right? And then, for example, they have entered our groundwater system and also our surface water system. And if we drink the water, the water has PFAS in it, then we have this PFAS in our body, and that there's a lot of evidence showing that they can cause a bunch of adverse health effects, including cancer.
Personally, I have lost a child. My daughter, Tiana, 19 years old. She passed away in 2007 from a cancer-related disease that I believe was caused by the water.
In addition to the loss of her daughter Tiana, Linda has seen a handful of other family members either be born with birth defects, grow sick, get cancer, or lose their lives to what she believes stems back to the TCE contamination in South Tucson in the 70s and 80s, a level of contamination she sees taking a new form with the growing presence of PFAS. Driven to make a change in the South Tucson community, Linda started Tucson's Environmental Justice Task Force and actively leads the charge to push the state and federal governments to remediate PFAS and protect communities like South Tucson from further contamination.
There was a recent survey, of course they cannot cover everyone, but it's a statistical survey that discovered that more than 97% of the US residents have PFAS in their blood. The good news is that concentration appeared to decrease in the past decade, likely because some of the PFAS have been abandoned for production and use.
At a personal level, the stuff eventually will cause cancers that will kill you. In terms of the water supply, we are going to need a pristine central well field. We are going to need, sooner rather than later, to rely on our well field, our aquifer, the groundwater that we have stored to serve our customers. Reason for that is pretty clear. The Colorado River is right now oversubscribed. We're in a multi-decade long drought. We're going to run out of Colorado River water, and so the long-term, not even long-term, the medium-term impact for Tucson water is that we have got to make sure that we've got treatment plants in place like now, so that when the Colorado River supply starts to run dry, and it will, that our central well field and our groundwater is clean to PFAS.
It really requires investment of resources, and also we need talents from many fields to work together to solve this problem.
This is what I'm responsible for. It goes back to what we want to do is to provide clean, safe drinking water to our customers, and so and we take that very seriously.
What about the victims? Yes, remediation is important. Yes, all the things that the government is doing, those are greatly appreciated by the community, but that's not enough. Cleanup alone is not enough. What about the victims, the people who drank, who live, work, learn, pray, and play in these communities? No attention has been placed on those communities, and I believe it's because of the lack of government oversight, lack of enforcement, and environmental racism.
I'm not going to be that guy from Flint, Michigan who kind of turned a blind eye to it and then decades later wound up having to shut down water systems and answer litigation from people who you knew and you had guilty knowledge that you were about to serve them tainted water. That's not going to happen in the city of Tucson. We're just not going to do that. And so we're in a full court press right now with the federal delegation, with the Department of Defense, with the EPA, with the state, to step up to the plate and get the resources to the city that we need to assure that our groundwater supply is pristine once we start serving it to the customers.
As far as other people responsible, what we're trying to do is make sure that we're able to do what we need to do at the TARP plant as far as treating for TC and 1,4-dioxane. But as the process, as PFAS gets an MCL, that will kick in Superfund type activities, and it'll be the EPA's job to go after responsible parties and to mandate cleanup in that way. So Tucson Water, everybody has their roles in this process, whether it's the EPA, ADQ, we all have different roles, but we're not the enforcer on cleaning up PFAS. It's not Tucson Water.
We are now a party to a multi-jurisdiction lawsuit against 3M and other manufacturers. That's moving forward. So one of the issues that I've been persistent on is making sure that our litigation team, the City of Tucson water attorneys, are knee-deep in this litigation to make sure that 3M owns a piece of this solution as well. 3M, they're located in Minnesota, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, that's how they get their name. They settled for over $600 million with the state of Minnesota on a PFAS contamination charge about a decade ago. So they have guilty knowledge. They knew it back in the 70s that what they were serving, what they were putting out into the marketplace was a toxin, and they are going to be a part of any kind of financial solution that we wind up getting as well. So I've mentioned the DoD several times, the federal government, the manufacturers, just as was true with the tobacco manufacturers, just as was true with the opioid manufacturers. The manufacturers of PFAS have got to own a part of the solution as well, and that part is going to be getting their checkbook out and writing some big checks to people like the City of Tucson.
Tucson Water didn't put PFAS in the aquifer, but we are at the front end of having to deal with this. So I don't know that all communities have been as quick reacting as we have been, but I'm pretty proud of our response here, and so there's still work to be done, but we're doing what we need to be doing.